We'd like to welcome a special guest into the program today, Susan Shumsky. She's written a bunch of books on meditation in the New Age spirituality field as well. Back in the 70s, she was a personal attendant to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Susan Shumsky, welcome to Beatles Weekly.
Oh, I'm excited to be here with you today, JC.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you know, we look back on this event, February and March 1968. It's been 50 years, and we look terrific.
Absolutely. We haven't aged a day, right?
Not at all. I'm just amazed by this whole thing. Can you tell us how you got involved with the Maharishi?
Well, I was a hippie. It was the 60s. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. Those of us who were flower children, we were seeking spiritual awakening. We were looking for altered states, higher states of consciousness, turn on, tune in, drop out. Mm-hmm. That was our mantra from Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass. And so I was really desperately seeking, quote unquote, a meditation guide, which I read about in Alan Watts' books and many other books that I was studying and reading. And a friend took me to the Transcendental Meditation Center in Berkeley. And as soon as I saw the picture of the guru on the wall, I immediately knew that this was where I would learn real meditation. Though I had sought to have these altered states through drugs, through LSD. It didn't work out for me, I'll tell you that. But certainly meditation did. And I was thrilled with the results of meditation. So it was not too long after that I found myself on the banks of the Ganges studying with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I stayed in his ashram for 6 months. That was 1969 to 1970. I learned TM before the Beatles, but went to India after the Beatles because I kept applying to go to the course again and again and again, but they kept telling me I was too young. Finally, Maharishi allowed younger students to come on the course that I went on.
So you were not there when the Beatles were there?
Not at the same time. I certainly know all the secrets. I wrote this book about it.
I know, and I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing. I'll be honest with you. I read a couple of chapters, and boy, it's so exciting and so different from something that we're used to. If you've never been on this kind of trip, tell me a little bit about how the Beatles influenced everybody in India and vice versa, how the Maharishi influenced the Beatles.
Well, Maharishi had a profound influence on the Beatles. And that showed up in their music, for example, Across the Universe, which they wrote even before they went to India, which, you know, is about this whole subject of meditation and attaining spiritual awakening. And the songs that they wrote while they were in India, many of which ended up on the White Album, those were very deeply influenced by Maharishi. And the Beatles, in turn, influenced the society by introducing them to these concepts of Eastern wisdom, Eastern philosophy, and meditation. I don't know, without the Beatles, I don't think that Maharishi would have made as profound an effect on the society and on the entire world, actually. The Beatles really popularized Maharishi, shall we say, brought him to the mainstream, so more people knew about who he was and what he was doing. People these days, they don't realize how famous Maharishi was. He was on Johnny Carson all the time, Merv Griffin. He was on the cover of every major magazine, Time, Look, Life, Saturday Evening Post, a lot of newspaper articles. I mean, he was huge in the 1970s.
And when the Beatles were in India in February and March 50 years ago this month, they were there with some other celebrities too, like Mike Love of the Beach Boys and Donovan, and even Mia Farrow.
Absolutely. Mia Farrow was actually the first celebrity to arrive at the ashram. On January 24th, she flew with Maharishi from the United States and her sister, Dear Prudence.
She didn't want to come out and play, did she?
Dear Prudence didn't want to come out and play, and Mia, all she wanted to do was come out and play. She didn't want to meditate. She wanted to hang out by the Ganges and read books or go shopping. As a matter of fact, Mia said that she was, quote unquote, bored out of her skull. And she likened the ashram to a quote-unquote graveyard.
So she didn't really enjoy herself while she was there, did she?
Well, she kept wanting to escape. So she did escape 2 times. One time she left for an animal safari for a while. And the second time she escaped to go hang out with her brother, John Farrow, who was at Goa hanging out with the European hippies and taking drugs.
Okay, so let's look deep into the life of a Beatle who was, in India. A typical day in the life. What was that like for the Beatles with the Maharishi? What would they do?
Well, it certainly was a lot different than what they were experiencing in their normal life, because they had time to relax, to rest, to go into really deep meditation. In fact, they were meditating up to 8 hours a day, and they were competing as to who was meditating the longest. So they spent a lot of time in their rooms. And in the middle of the course, Maharishi told his students, there were about 60 students on this course. It was a teacher training course, just like the course that I took with Maharishi. And in the middle of the course, he told people to go into their rooms and not come out at all and have the food delivered to their door. And John and George did participate in that at that time. Ringo and Paul had already left by then. Ringo stayed for 2 weeks, and Paul stayed for 1 month. And John and George stuck it out. They stayed for 2 months. So they spent a lot of time in deep meditation, and they were very serious about learning from Maharishi and about experiencing these deeper states of awareness, these profound meditative states that you get through practicing transcendental meditation.
And is it true that Ringo actually brought baked beans with him?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he brought Heinz beans, cans of Heinz beans. He filled an entire suitcase so that he would be able to handle eating there, because he had difficulty with his digestive system. So it was hard for him to eat food outside of his normal, everyday life in England.
Well, he must have been a riot around the around the campfire.
Absolutely. And his wife, Maureen, was terrified of insects. As a matter of fact, one fly kept her hostage for several hours until Ringo could return. But actually, there were quite a number of insects at the ashram because it's in the middle of the jungle. There were scorpions, there were millipedes, there were centipedes. I saw all of those insects when I was there. And also there were a lot of wildlife there. A lot of monkeys jumping up and down on the tops of our bungalows, and peacocks and crows, very loud, screeching all the time. And even tigers were seen from time to time. So it was really the middle of the jungle, and it was up on a cliff, a 300-foot cliff overlooking the Ganges River. It was a beautiful view and a very serene atmosphere. And the Beatles really had an opportunity to be very creative and write a lot of songs because of that wonderful atmosphere that was created in the ashram.
So many great songs from the White Album. We're talking with Susan Shumsky, author of Maharishi Me and so many other books. Now, in the 70s, Susan, let's fast forward a little bit. You became a personal attendant to the Maharishi. How do you do that? Do you have to apply for the job? I mean, is there a form you fill out? What happened?
No, it's not like that at all. I asked him if I could do that, and he accepted me. I was lucky that way, and I spent 6 years on his personal staff. I lived for 22 years in his various ashrams in the United States, in India, and mostly in Europe, where I was on, like I said, I was on his personal staff in Europe.
When the Beatles stayed in India, what kind of sleeping quarters were? Did they all stay in one room? Did they have separate rooms? How did that work out?
They had separate rooms where they stayed with their girlfriends or wives, and we stayed, and they stayed in these bungalows or barracks, you might call them. They were simple rooms made out of cement and cinder blocks. They were just a room, and in the room there'd be a cot with mattress and a chair and a table and some shelving and electric heaters that didn't work very often. And that was about it. And the showers were outdoors. There was a latrine, kind of outdoor latrine with a toilet, regular sit-down Western toilet. Thank goodness, not a squat toilet. There were kind of Western accommodations, but it was quite primitive, and the showers would be outside, and it was cold water mostly. I mean, they tried to heat the water, but not too successfully. I mean, Maharishi was trying his best to accommodate us Westerners, but, it was definitely a little bit primitive.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about drugs. Was the Maharishi anti-drug?
Absolutely. Maharishi was very anti-drug. As a matter of fact, in order to learn transcendental meditation, you had to stop taking any kind of recreational drugs for 15 days. So the Beatles stopped taking drugs for about 5 minutes when they learned transcendental meditation.
So they cheated.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a story that during the time they were at the ashram, they were smuggling in alcohol and also hashish, and maybe even other drugs like LSD.
And the Maharishi knew about this, or he just turned his head and just looked the other way?
No, definitely when he found out about it, he was pretty furious. And as a matter of fact, there's 3 reasons why the Beatles left India. One of those reasons was that Maharishi asked some people in their party, I don't know which people, but he asked them to leave because of the fact that they were taking drugs and alcohol.
Okay, so that's one reason. What are the other 2 reasons?
One of them had to do with a film deal gone wrong. Another one had to do with a woman named Rosalind, who Maharishi apparently made a pass at. And that had to do with Alexis Mardas. Do you want to hear the story?
Well, sure. Would that happen to be Sexy Sadie? I mean, is that the reason why that was written?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so Alexis Mardas is I don't know how to call him. He was a Beatle hanger-oner. And Alexis Mardas attached himself to John Lennon's hip sometime in 1967. And Cynthia was very concerned about the fact that he was having this Svengali type of influence upon John. He was always hanging around, and John declared him to be my new guru. In fact, he introduced Alexis to the other Beatles as that. And Alexis Mardas was a little kooky, a little crazy, and he was going to drill the Beatles' skulls, something called trepanation, which is supposedly helps to open up the third eye of people if you drill their skull. I mean, I know this sounds absolutely nuts, but he was going to do that. And he purportedly invented all these insane things that were fantastic inventions, that completely impossible inventions. But somehow the Beatles got really impressed by him, and so did Brian Jones. So he was supposedly this great genius. The reality, he was a TV repairman. That's the reality. But he went to India. He showed up there very later on, late March, and his prime directive or his definite motive for coming to India was to get the Beatles away from Maharishi. And he admitted that. So he was having an affair with this woman, Rosalind Bonus, and late at night he was heard, through the walls practicing the Kama Sutra with her. And he was smuggling in alcohol to drink for various Beatles and their wives, their girlfriends. And at some point, Maharishi caught wind of it. One of his assistants, Raghvendra, told one of Rosalind's roommates, he said that Rosalind was going to be asked to leave. Rosalind and Alexis were spreading rumors around the ashram that Maharishi had made a pass at her. And it's entirely possible that she was telling the truth, simply because there were many women that apparently Maharishi had made passes at, not just Rosalind.
Right.
Even while the Beatles were there was a German woman who Maharishi made a pass at. More than that, he actually was fondling her. And there were other cases at other times, including while I was there and when I was close and I knew what was going on in the inner circle, that something was going on between Maharishi and the women. So anyway, the Beatles argued about it all night long, and when morning came, John and George went to Maharishi's bungalow. They went inside Maharishi's bedroom, and the 3 of them had a conversation, and no one knows really what happened in that conversation. But John and George have reported what went on in the conversation, and the outcome of that was that they came out of the room and declared that they were leaving. So in any case, they rushed and got the taxis, and they left in a flurry. But right before they left, John Lennon wrote this song. The song was called Maharishi, and it had many expletives in it. And he was calling Maharishi by these names. And when George heard the song, he said, "You can't do that. What are you doing? That's crazy. You can't do that." So then John changed the words to Sexy Sadie rather than Maharishi. That's how that song came about.
And that's the story behind the hit. We're talking with Susan Shumsky. She's written a book, the latest, Maharishi and Me, Seeking Enlightenment with the Beatles Guru. And it's nice. I mean, it's a great read. Plus, there's some wonderful pictures in here, too. Susan, where can our listeners pick this book up?
They can get the book Maharishi and Me anywhere. Bookstores, online, every online outlet. It's there. It's everywhere.
Susan, it's been wonderful talking to you. You have great stories. You're a blast.
Thank you. It was a joy for me to speak with you as well. It was a lot of fun.